From the first time they share space, Christopher Moltisanti and Little Paulie Germani are positioned like two magnets turned the wrong way, close enough to feel the pull, but never meant to lock together. Christopher is Tony's protégé, erratic, ambitious, constantly oscillating between self-pity and bursts of competence. Little Paulie is Paulie Walnut's shadow, dutiful, semi-invisible, a satellite who rises or falls with his uncle's tide. Neither man is the center of the universe, both orbit brighter bodies. That alone seeds the kind of rivalry that doesn't need words. It just hangs there. Christopher reads the room like an actor who believes the role is already his. In a world that rewards nerve, he confuses nerve with destiny. Little Paulie reads the room like a stagehand. He knows where the props sit, where the exits are, who gets first and last lines. To Christopher, that looks like smallness. To Little Paulie, Christopher's performance looks like a liability that someone else will pay for later. Their early collisions are soft, almost forgettable. A curt look, a slightly delayed response, a smile that travels only halfway. You can feel the pecking order at work. Christopher is higher in Tony's esteem than Little Paulie's and Paulie's. The younger man is supposed to defer to the other younger man, because that's how proxy hierarchies function. But people don't move like chess pieces. Resentment is human nature under pressure, and both men feel the pressure of borrowed power. Christopher is defined by Tony. Little Paulie is defined by Paulie. The minute that borrowed light flickers, each man must choose, cling tighter to the lamp, or try to shine by himself. The first silent rule that governs the relationship is this: in a crew, status is a story other people tell about you. Christopher wants it written in bold. Little Paulie is content if the story gets told at all. That contrast becomes combustible the moment story collides with money. Money isn't just money in the DiMeo world. It's a map of who you are. Construction materials, trucking loads, slivers of revenue skimmed off a deal, these aren't merely income streams. They are flags planted in the ground. They say, this part of New Jersey is mine, through me, up to him. Christopher understands this intimately. When he's put in charge of a thing, he treats the thing like a reflection of his place under Tony. He often mishandles it, or uses it to self-medicate his insecurities, but he never doubts the principle, what's attached to my name is attached to my honor. Little Paulie, conversely, tends to treat what's attached to Paulie as a commons for Paulie's people. This isn't sloppiness, it's inheritance. He has grown up in a collegial shadow system. If the uncle's fingers touch a pie, there are crumbs for the family. If some drywall goes missing, who calls it a crime when the job's already greased? If a pallet disappears and nobody squeals, isn't that the advantage of living inside the circle rather than out? In that sense, Little Paulie isn't disrespecting Christopher when he hovers near Christopher's revenue. He's obeying an older logic. Crew adjacency confers practical rights. 2 logics, 1 street. That's the fuse. When the story finally crackles into overt conflict, it isn't over a philosophical difference. It's over something heavy, visible, and countable: building materials. Christopher's name is on a project. Materials under his purview go missing. Little Paulie is connected to the misunderstanding. In other trades, this is a managerial headache. In a mob crew, it's a referendum on identity. Christopher isn't just being robbed, he's being erased. It's a statement that says, you can be Tony's boy and still be touched. For a man already feeling the tremors of inferiority, addiction, paranoia, and the knowledge that his status depends on someone else's patience, that's intolerable. Christopher's response is raw, theatrical, and intimate. He doesn't file a complaint. He doesn't write it up in the code of sit-downs. He confronts, he beats, and he escalates until Little Paulie goes through glass and air. The window toss is more than violence, it's message craft. A fist says, I'm angry. A window says, I control the frame you see me in. In a subculture where going out the window has historic overtones of betrayal and spectacle, the act becomes a small mythology, Christopher grasping for authorship of his own legend. He can't be Tony's heir in paperwork, but he can be a man others fear to cross. The aftermath is the other half of the message. Little Paulie reportedly breaks vertebrae and lives. Living changes the terms. Death would have closed the book. A homicide opens formal channels, demands apologies, money, or blood. Survival puts everyone in purgatory. What is owed to the wounded man when the man who threw him is higher in the house? What does Paulie owe family? What does Tony owe Paulie? What does Christopher owe anybody besides his temper? The silences that follow are the real text. No speech will do here. Apologies are political currency. Use them wrong and your balance sheet flips. Little Paulie becomes the point at which the senior men test boundaries with each other without ever speaking the true names of envy and fatigue. This is where identity flows upward. It's not just Little Paulie versus Christopher, it's Paulie versus Christopher through Little Paulie. Their relationship crystallizes a broader question. How does an aging soldier, Paulie, receive the rise of a younger made man with Tony's ear, Christopher, when the younger man harms his blood? The answer is both practical and haunted. Paulie is old school. He believes in lines, bloodlines, respect lines, revenue lines. Christopher's act crosses them all in one motion. And yet Paulie also believes in survival. War with Tony's favorite is death by 1,000 meetings, or death by one careful accident. So Paulie swallows, spits to the side, and keeps count. The ledger in his head grows heavier, and the interest compounds in small humiliations he doesn't forget. But he does not explode, because he has learned something tragic. Erupting at the wrong time doesn't prove you're strong, it proves you're expendable. For Christopher, the calculus is inverted. He thinks explosion is proof of life. To him, not throwing Little Paulie is a confession of weakness. He cannot afford that confession. He's a man forever trying to convince himself that he deserves the table he's sitting at. The window is his certification exam. He aces it in his own mind and fails it everywhere else. In the space between those two logics, Little Paulie is the hinge that squeaks. He's injured, he's sidelined, and he's watching two larger animals circle each other while pretending not to. Does he want vengeance? Maybe. But want is a luxury he can't afford without permission. That helplessness, being hurt without the right to be angry, defines his relationship to Christopher more than any words exchanged before or after. He becomes living evidence of a story only the bosses can finish. There is a dark irony to the feud. They are criminals arguing over the ethics of theft. But the show's deeper joke is that mob ethics are not about theft, they're about jurisdiction. You don't steal from us, and us is a moving target determined by who vouches for whom. Christopher sees us as Tony's vertical, and by extension, anything under him. Little Paulie sees us as Paulie's horizontal, a web of favors and low-level movement. The window makes visible what the two geometries do when they overlap. They shatter glass. From a purely pragmatic angle, Christopher's rage is understandable. He has always been disrespected at the margins, too clever to be dismissed, too volatile to be fully trusted. Every time he's brushed aside, he self-medicates with violence or chemicals. Little Paulie, in that sense, is caught underfoot not because he's the guiltiest, but because he's the most available embodiment of Chris's fear. The materials could have been anything. The insult is the same. From Little Paulie's angle, we can read fatalism. He knows who his uncle is. He knows Christopher cannot be touched without the house shaking. He also knows that Paulie's star doesn't burn as hot with Tony as it used to. The right move, if survival is the goal, is to take the injury and become a cautionary tale others whisper about. The window becomes his resume line. I did my time in gravity and kept my mouth shut. That is a bleak kind of professionalism, but it's the one the system rewards. Nothing in this world means what it means without Tony's gaze on it. Christopher's attack on Little Paulie is terrible or forgivable, depending on the day's weather inside Tony's head. If Tony is irritated with Paulie, his chatter, his superstitions, his frugality, he might see the attack as regrettable. But let's not turn this into a federal case. If Tony is impatient with Christopher, his drug lapses, his film fantasies, his passive-aggressive sulks, he might decide to lecture him and make a small show of discipline. Either way, Little Paulie's body becomes the message board for Tony's mood. That is the cruelty of the chain of command. The person who bleeds is never the person who writes the memo. For Christopher, Tony's indulgence is oxygen and poison. It validates his instinct that drastic action is how you prove your claim. It also isolates him further from the many must lead who now read every future order as a threat. When your boss throws one of yours out a window and nothing really happens, what does fair ever mean again? Christopher loses something essential in that exchange: believable authority. After the glass settles, people obey him because of Tony, not because of him. He will feel that gap in every room. He will fill it with bravado, which makes the gap larger. For Little Paulie, Tony's non-apocalypse no war, no spectacular retaliation is a cold lesson. Injuries to the minor planets don't warrant orbit corrections if the sun is stable. He can file the memory. He can wait for a day when the balance changes, or he can shrink into the work. The show never gives us his monologue, and that omission is the point. Invisibility is the tax he pays for survival. A man falling out a window is more than slapstick. It's ritual. In a culture that worships control, the image of a body briefly owned by gravity is humiliating. It turns a man into an object, the opposite of agency. Christopher understands humiliation well. He wears it like a jacket under his jacket. He knows what it did to him when he felt toyed with by superiors, laughed at by peers, scolded by his uncle figures. In throwing Little Paulie, he exports humiliation outward, hoping to reverse the flow. But humiliation is a boomerang. Once everyone recognizes you as a man who creates spectacle to prove manhood, your manhood becomes spectacle dependent. That's a dead end. Little Paulie's humiliation is quieter. He is the guy people mention with a wince, broke 6 vertebrae, and that becomes his calling card for a season. The body keeps the score, so does the room. Men like him often find safety in becoming a joke. If they can narrate their own fall with a grim shrug, it is what it is. They stay usable and use his life. If they demand justice beyond what the hierarchy allows, they become a problem, and problems get solved. The fact that he does not become a problem tells us what he decided about Christopher, not that he forgave him, but that he knew where the oxygen came from. We imagine, because we've been trained by this world, that there must be a sit down. Maybe there was some version of it. Maybe envelopes changed hands. Maybe Tony issued a proportional fine or Paulie secured a concession somewhere else. Maybe nothing formal happened at all because the priority stack at the time, New York friction, domestic chaos, external heat, made an internal committee meeting about a semi-made nephew's broken back feel like bureaucracy for its own sake. The truth is less important than the texture. The show leaves it vague because vagueness is policy. Clear outcomes create precedent. Precedent creates expectations. Expectations create future fights. Ambiguity, by contrast, is a solvent. It dilutes grievance until only sediment remains. That ambiguity becomes the permanent state of the Little Paulie-Christopher relationship. After the fall, they share air without sharing language. A nod, a grimace, the polite minimum. The debt, if any, is carried forward in an uncollectible account. Everyone pretends to forget. Nobody forgets. Strip the plot to its skeleton, and you see the equation both men solve differently. Christopher's version. Loyalty is proved in moments of crisis. Do you flinch, or do you act? If you act, the organization will rationalize your method later. Little Paulie's version. Loyalty is proved in the willingness to absorb pain without making it the boss's problem. If you endure, you will continue to eat. Both definitions are ugly, and both work. Christopher's earns him a brief, hot circle of fear around his name. Little Paulie's earns him continued access to oxygen in a cold climate. Neither earns respect in the clean sense, because clean respect is a luxury item in a dirty economy. The friction between those two definitions is why their relationship never stabilizes. Each man's proof of loyalty looks like betrayal to the other. For Christopher, Little Paulie's misunderstanding is betrayal of boundaries. For Little Paulie, Christopher's theatrical lesson is betrayal of proportionality. Each thinks he's keeping the code. Each thinks the other broke it. Because The Sopranos refuses tidy knots, the story never grants Christopher and Little Paulie a closing scene where they speak the truce or ignite the war. That artistic choice is truthful. Most workplace feuds, especially in violent hierarchies, end in one of 3 ways: time, transfer, or tragedy. Time sands the edges. Transfers move people to other orbits. Tragedy erases the math. In their case, tragedy, elsewhere and otherwise, removes the chance that the balance sheet will ever be settled face to face. What lingers isn't a vendetta. It's a doctrine. Do not confuse access with ownership. Do not confuse hierarchy with safety. The unresolvable quality of their relationship says something larger about the mafia crew. For all the talk of rules, the house runs on interpretations. Whoever can marshal the most credible interpretation at the moment gets to call his violence necessary and yours reckless. That is power, the authority to narrate cause and effect. Christopher believes he has that authority when he is hot. Little Paulie knows he never will, and that knowledge keeps him alive. Could Christopher have handled the theft differently? Yes, he could have staged a calmer confrontation, demanded restitution, and forced Paulie into a formal acknowledgement of boundary. But that would require patience he doesn't have and trust in a mechanism he fears will never favor him once the door closes. Could Little Paulie have avoided the conflict? Possibly, he could have drawn a bright line in his mind between Paulie's reach and Tony's vertical. But he grew up in a neighborhood where those lines blur by design. Ambiguity is the grease that keeps the gears from seizing. He acted according to custom in a moment that required law. In that sense, the window is a system's failure more than an individual one. It is what happens when an older patronage logic collides with the newer managerial logic under stress, with no written constitution to decide the case. The body that falls is the case law. Let's pivot inward, because you asked for some psychological dissection alongside the chronology. Christopher's interior. He's permanently drafting a closing argument for his own worthiness. Every challenge becomes Exhibit A in a case he believes he's losing. Throwing Little Paulie isn't just punishment, it's proof to himself that he can still change the temperature of a room with his hands. Men like Christopher confuse fear with respect because fear is easy to measure and respect is not. After the fall, he feels safer and more alone. Safer because a line has been drawn. Alone because he's the only one who believes the line is real. Little Paulie's interior? He carries the difference between hurt and harm. Hurt is pain you remember when the weather changes. Harm is transformation you can't undo. He chooses to believe he was hurt, not harmed, because believing otherwise puts him in a story he cannot win. That belief shapes his behavior afterward: dutiful, small talk functional, late shift reliable. He is a man who sees that the safest place on a ship in a storm is below decks, not screaming at the captain about a hole that's already there. The tragedy, small but exact, is that both men are right about the world they live in, and both are wrong about the best way to live inside it. Christopher's way burns him, Little Paulie's way erases him. Their collision is a micro-theory of the mafia decline. A healthy hierarchy, even a criminal one, translates ambiguity into order. Boundaries are understood, transgressions are priced, apologies are designed to preserve face. The later season mafia family cannot do that consistently. It is too busy managing external wars, internal jealousies, and the psychic fatigue of men who realize they will never be what they told their younger selves they'd be. In that exhaustion, the house stops producing clarity and starts producing incidents. Incidents create myths, and myths replace policy. Remember when Chris threw Little Paulie out the window? Becomes both a warning and a trend line. You can manage a crew that way in the short term. You can't build a durable future on memorable outbursts. That's why their relationship stays unfinished. There is no mechanism to finish it. The tools for resolution, real apology, proportionate restitution, a shared sense that lines matter, have dulled. What's left are pies to cut, hands to shake, and an understanding that whoever controls the narrative controls the next hour, but maybe not the next day. If you try to distill everything to a single picture, it isn't the mid-air body. It's the hallway afterward, the recovery, the re-entry into rooms where everyone looks and then looks away. The stiffness in a back when laughter starts across the table. The way a cup is set down, too gently, by a hand that no longer trusts surfaces. Christopher's shoes crunching faint glass days later in his mind. Little Paulie's eyes scanning doorframes like altimeters. Two men bound by a moment, neither can rewrite and neither is allowed to name. That is their relationship. A quiet war with one loud incident. A story of two sons of larger men who inherited opposite philosophies of survival. One chose spectacle to announce his borders. The other chose silence to avoid being redrawn. The show, honest to the end, lets the truth sit between them without verdict. And maybe that's the only verdict that fits. In their world, you don't resolve tensions, you outlast them or they outlast you. Power is narrative, not muscle. Christopher's muscle dominates the scene. The story afterward belongs to the room, and the room never truly crowns him. Survival is a talent. Little Paulie's ability to keep moving in a diminished circle is not cowardice. It's a specialization the organization selects for, until it doesn't. Boundaries without process lead to theater. Because neither side trusts a process to price the trespass, theater substitutes for law. And theater demands an audience that will never grant closure. Ambiguity is policy. The vagueness around Little Paulie's exact status, associate, soldier, nephew with privileges, enables the system to avoid precedent at the cost of morale. His relationship with Christopher is the emotional ledger entry that vagueness accrues. In the end, what binds them isn't respect or even hatred. It's the knowledge that both were shaped by someone else's shadow. Christopher's shadow is Tony's. Little Paulie's is Paulie's. Shadows distort size and make distance hard to measure. Under them, men misjudge where their feet end and the drop begins. And sometimes, as both learned in one unforgettable second, you only realize the measurement error when